Hello everyone, it's Steve from Financial Python, and I wanted to put together this quick video on how to upload files to S3 using Python. So this isn't necessarily finance related, but it's something that I do a lot, basically in all of my scripts. What I do is I upload my log files into S3, and it allows me to, organize them and view them at later dates if I need to, kind of see if there's any errors happening or anything like that. I did make a previous video on logging if you want to go and check that out, but this video is just going to be about how to take a file and to upload that into S3. So let's get started on the AWS side. So the first thing we need to do before we write our script is do some configuration in AWS. So I'm going to go to S3, where I'm going to create a new bucket. So let me create a bucket here, and I'll just call it FP test bucket. And I don't believe I need to make any other changes. I am going to note my region here. We see US East 1, but we'll get to that a little later, what we're going to do with that. So really, I don't have to change any other settings. I'm just going to do create bucket. And, contains invalid characters. So let me fix that. Bucket name already exists. There we go. Needs to be unique. So we have SP test bucket 1. And let me create this. Okay, so now that I have my bucket created, let me just duplicate this, and I'm going to create a different AWS tab. I just want to keep that open. But I'm going to go to a new service. I'm going to go to IAM, which is Identity Access Management. Basically controls permissions and users for actually accessing AWS services. So in here, what we're going to do is we need to create a policy that says, a policy that grants access to that bucket. And then what we're going to do is take that policy and we're going to give that to a new user that we create. So let's go over to policies, and I'm going to do create policy. Okay, and what I like to do, you see, you can do some point and click configuration to set up your policy, or we can switch over to JSON, and that's what I like to do. I like to switch to JSON and basically configure my bucket permit or my policy permissions here. So the first thing you'll notice is in SID. So you see, it gives you it kind of gives you a template for a policy here that we're able to edit. And the first thing is the SID, which is really just a unique identifier. You don't actually even need it, but I'll just populate it. We'll say SP test bucket access policy. But again, not even something that we actually need. Okay, and here it's going to say what actions do we want to allow for this policy. So you see the policy, the effect we're giving is allow, and what actions are we allowing. So I don't need an array. I can just add in a string, and it's going to be S3 with a star saying give me access to all S3 functionality. And the resource is saying, where do we want to give that access? So we want to give it to that bucket. So we want to, in order to specify the resource, again, we don't need an array. We can just do one string since it's only one resource. And the resource will be ARN. So ARN stands for Amazon Resource Name, AWS S3. And this is just standard AWS syntax to specify a resource in a policy, 3 colons, as you can see here, and then the bucket name. So SP, we named it SP test bucket 1. And then if I give a slash and a star, that's saying, give access to everything inside of that bucket. Okay. So that should be good. So I'm going to click next, and then I can name this policy. So you see, kind of the permissions defined in this policy is S3, read list permissions, basically can do everything. And the bucket name is saying, string like FP test 1. And we know that's the bucket we named it. So I can give it a policy name. So we'll say FP test bucket policy. Call whatever we want there. Description gives access to FP test bucket, S3 bucket. And so we'll say create policy. And we have this policy created. That's great. So that policy, again, what that is that policy is going to give access to that S3 bucket. But who are we going to give that access to? That's the next step. So let's go over to users and let's create a new user. And the username, we'll call it SP test bucket user. Again, we can call that whatever we want. We don't want to give access to the management console. We're not doing that. So I'm just going to click next. Okay, and as you can see, the next step is going to be setting the permissions, and it gives some different options about how we can set those permissions, one of them being to attach the policies directly. So I'm going to do that because we just created our policy, and we want to attach that policy to our user. So I'm going to search for this policy, this SP test bucket policy we just created. That's great. I'm going to click next. Do we want to give any tags? No, we do not. That's not necessary at this time. So we can just do a little bit of a review and click create user. Okay, great. So now let me go to this user, FP test bucket user. Okay, and so we have our user created, and we see our permissions for that user is this policy that we generated, which is great. And as you can see, there's this other tab here called security credentials, and I'm going to navigate to that. And you see here with that, we have this create access key. So I'm going to actually first, before I do that, I'm going to go over to my code and we'll start making our script before we do this because we're going to need a place to put these after we create it. So let's do that for a second. So I have this file, this folder that I created, S3 upload, and let me play around with that. So let me create a new file in here. I'm going to just call it main.py. That's what I like to call all of my files. I'll just do the standard Python syntax of calling a method on load, on script run. So when the script runs and the name is main, we're going to call a main method that we create now. So let me create that main method. And just to start, I'll just say I'm in the main method. So right now I'm just doing standard Python housekeeping, but just because I wanted a place to load in these details after I generate them. So let's actually do that real quick. Let's go to create access key when we're in this user. And it's going to ask, what our use case is. And, basically our use case is just local code at this time. We're going to use this key in local code to access our environment. I'm going to say I understand this recommendation, and I'm going to click next. And I don't need any tags here. So I'm just going to click next. And as you can see, what was generated was an access key and a secret key. And I'm going to need both of these in order to programmatically access this bucket. Essentially, with these keys, I'll be able to log in as this user from my script. So let me copy that. And I'm just going to create a variable here. We'll call it AWS access key. Typically, I would have these in some sort of config file or something like that. But for the time being, I'm just going to put it right here. AWS secret key. Okay, so we see the secret. Let me copy that. Back to code. Okay, great. So we have that, and again, I just created that just so I could. I created this file and just just wanted to start putting in my details. So the other details I'm going to need for this is the S3 bucket name, which we generated. So we called it FP test bucket 1. And I'm also going to need my region. So I'm going to say AWS region. And if I go back to AWS, you can see the region is in your URL. So mine is US-East-1. Yours might be different depending on where you're located. But you are going to need, the region that you're located, which is going to end up being the same region that your bucket is in. So you see, my buckets are all in this US East 1. So that's where my new bucket is as well. So basically, yeah, that region is going to be wherever your bucket is located. Okay, So now we have our AWS details, all our AWS config done. How are we going to actually upload a file? So if I go to this documentation for Boto3, so basically this package is an AWS Python package. If I just go to the main page here, you can see this package allows you to create, configure, and manage AWS services, such as these, including S3. Basically, all of the S3 services you can access using Boto3. And this one piece of documentation, which I'll link in this video, is an example of how to use Boto3 to do an S3 upload. So we see, we have the S3 upload here. It does give some, details in terms of like error handling. We're not going to do that at this time, and we do need some more details in this configuration, which I'll go through as well. But so let's use this example in our code, and I'll talk through everything that we're doing. So the first thing is importing the necessary package. So you see there's importing Boto3, and if you don't have this already, you may need to install that by just doing pip install. That's something I already have, so I don't have to do that. But if I wanted to, again, it would just be on the command line running, pip3 install Boto3. Again, I'm not going to do that right now because I already have it, but that's how you would install that. Okay, and with that, the next thing we would do is create our S3 client variable and set it equal to Boto3.client. And again, in this example, they're only inputting S3, but we need to provide a few more details here. So let's walk through what they are. So I'm going to specify a service name, and that is going to be S3. And then it's going to ask for a region name. And we have our AWS region variable. Again, I just have all my variables here. Typically, I'd have that in some sort of config, but I'm not going to do that for this video. And then I'm going to do my my programmatic access using the keys that we had generated. So we have this AWS access key, which we have a variable for, and AWS secret access key, which we also have a variable for. Okay. And then from here, we can actually do the same logic that they have in their try here. Like, I'm just going to copy and paste that and explain what's happening here. So what this is doing is taking this client that we generated and running the upload file method. So that's something that's built in when we generate this Boto3 client with a service of S3. It comes with this method upload file. And as you can see, that takes a few different parameters. So the bucket we already have, right? So we AWS bucket. And then there's two other variables that are included. I'm just going to expand this. So there's file name and object name, and the difference between those are, so the file name is saying what local file do we want to input. So let's actually create one real quick. So I'm just going to create a new file. I'm going to call it testfile.txt. I'm going to say here is my file I want to upload. Okay, let's save that. And if I go back to main, I'm just going to create another variable called local file, and I'll call it testfile.txt. Okay, and the object name is saying what do we want this to be called when it's uploaded into AWS. So even because it's called test file here, it doesn't necessarily need to be called test file when we upload it, but we can, just to keep it consistent. And I usually do that again just for consistency. So but I just, as an example, I'll create another file, I'll create another variable, and I'll call it name for S3. And we'll just keep the name for the same, but I just wanted to create two variables just so you have an understanding about what those actually do. And from there, we can just print our response, which kind of annoying. If it's successful, the response is actually going to be blank, so that's good. Upload file response. It's only going to actually give us any information if there's an error. So the ideal situation is this response is blank. So I think that's it. So this using this example, and so let's open our terminal and let's give this a shot. Okay, so I'm already navigated. So I'm going to do Python 3 main.py, and let's see what happens. In main method, upload file response, none. So that's great. So there's no error. Let's go to our S3, and let's find this bucket, fp test1. And we see we have this test file that was uploaded just right now. And let me click on that. Let me download it and open it. It opened here. Here's my file I want to upload. Okay, so this is working exactly correct, exactly how we expected it. So again, just to recap, we created an S3 bucket named FB test bucket 1. We then created an IAM policy which gave access to this, which gave access to that bucket. So our policy, this FB test bucket policy, looking at that, it gave access to that bucket. Then we created a user that we could assign that policy to. And then with that user, we were able to get credentials. So, you know, that user, FB test bucket user, we generated an access key and a secret key that we use in our script in order to, you know, programmatically access our AWS services. If I try to access any other services besides S3, that would fail because, again, right now this user only has access to that specific bucket, which is what we want. You know, we want to try to be as minimal as possible with our permissions. We, you know, we only want to assign permissions that are absolutely necessary, which is what we did in this case. And then because we had access to that bucket, we were able to use this this Boto3 Python package, which is the AWS package, to upload our file. So yeah, I mean, this is obviously a very basic example. There are a lot of things you could do with this. Again, typically my biggest use case is I'm going to generate a log in all of my scripts, and I'm going to take that log and I'm going to upload it into S3, and this way I'm able to just review those in the future. Like if there's any issue with any script that I have running, you know, if something doesn't run the way I'm expecting it to, I can go and look at that log that's in S3, and I can go into S3, I can download that log, and I can see what's going on there. But obviously, there's a ton of use cases, which is why, again, I just wanted to make a very generic video, not finance related. So, hope you guys learned something. Appreciate you watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.